So, hi all. It's my great pleasure to have Professor David Shanks with us again with an interview regarding his talk in our DEB seminar. And we'll start right away from the first question. David, what are the main implications of your findings of your talk about the anchoring effect, in your opinion?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, anchoring is one of the most fundamental examples of an apparent anomaly or bias or irrationality in the way that people form judgments, where what seem to be irrelevant numbers have an influence on the judgments that people make. And this seems to happen in, even in important real world situations in medicine, in jury decision making, and so on. But it's kind of striking that despite having been first discovered 50 years ago, we don't actually have any really convincing theories of what is going on when anchors influence our judgments. Now, we're not proposing some grand and groundbreaking theory here, but we did feel, Adam Harris and I have felt for some time, that maybe one of the reasons why theory progress has been a bit slow has been because people come to anchoring with the wrong mindset, if you like. They come to anchoring thinking that it's a rather automatic system one, in Kahneman's terms, process, a kind of unconscious automatic thing that we can't avoid. And perhaps that's not really right, or at least not doesn't really capture the true essence of anchoring. We think that there's a lot more thinking, system two thinking, going on when people are influenced by anchors. And so the experiments were, aiming to try and probe that idea a bit more.
I see. Just thinking out loud about this system one, system two. Yeah. So will you think that if I have a challenging question which requires me to think a lot, then I will be less biased by an anchor? Well, if it's an automatic process, then maybe I will be more biased by an anchor. I'm just
yeah. Well, I mean, I should let me put my cards on the table. So I'm the person who referred to system one and system two. So it's completely understandable that you would ask that question. But in reality, I don't buy that distinction at all. I mean, I don't personally, I'm very unpersuaded that there is anything in the human mind that really falls under the description of system one processes. I think, in the extreme case, I think everything is conscious. But that I appreciate is a very extreme view.
But very interesting view.
Right, maybe, yeah. But on your question, I mean, no, I'm not sure I would want to predict that you would have less bias when people are more deliberative. It's just that, so people might still be influenced by anchors, even when they're thinking quite deeply. And some of those influences might be, from one perspective or another, a little bit counterintuitive or seemingly irrational. But our point would be that you have to get inside the participant's head. From the participant's point of view, they may not think of what they're doing as being irrational in quite the same way.
And what happens, just another question that came to my mind now, what happens when the stakes are high? That it has an influence?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, we haven't particularly looked at that. Some studies have tried to incentivize people to avoid an influence of anchors. And I think if I remember rightly, there's a recent meta-analysis which does show a small influence of incentives, reducing anchoring a little bit, but not massively. But to me, the message of that, I mean, you have to be careful what inference you draw from that. I mean, some people would draw the inference from that, well, then everything is system one, everything is automatic, you can't avoid it. I would draw a different inference, which is that people incorporate anchors into their decision making in ways that we don't always have deep insight into what's going on in their minds deliberately. And the thinking that the steps that they're going through in their reasoning are pretty much the same, whether or not there's an incentive or not, or an absence of incentive. So that would be a different conclusion about the relatively weak impact of incentives. Maybe people, when they have incentives, even when they don't have incentives, are going through the same sort of deliberative steps.
I see. And what is, in your opinion, how is anchoring not related? How do we deal with anchoring in decisions from experience, in situations in which we have a lot of experience with certain decisions that we make?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of answers to that, I think. So one answer is to do with expertise. So obviously, an expert is somebody who has had a lot of learning from experience, a lot of feedback about making judgments. I mean, for example, if you are what we would call in England an estate agent, or in North America a realtor. I don't know what you would call them.
Yeah, realtor.
Realtor, yeah. I mean, of course, you have lots and lots of feedback and experience about the valuation of properties. And so there's an opportunity for you there to learn to avoid being influenced by an anchor if that influence is going to lead you to an unrealistic estimation of the value of a property. So I think there is one sort of interesting line of questions about how experts are influenced or less influenced by anchors than non-experts. And again, I think the sort of general picture is that experts do tend to be less influenced. The other way, I suppose, is kind of more to do with direct feedback. And I think there's a potentially interesting strand of experiments which somebody might want to run one day, where participants engage in a kind of normal anchoring task, but they actually start to get some feedback on their judgments. So, for example, you could have people estimating quantities of, how long is the Amazon River, and actually give them feedback. So it's a little bit like looking at expertise, but this would be all within the context of a sort of simple experiment where people have the opportunity, again, to learn that the anchor may or may not be informative about their judgment. So there is an interesting set of questions, I think, to be asked about experience and anchoring influences.
That's very interesting. And going back to your example with what you said about expertise, do you think expertise matter only in the domain of expertise, I assume, or in general? So if I'm an expert, does it help me? I'm being less biased with anchoring in general, or specifically in my domain of expertise?
Well, I think there is some research showing that, for example, American people show anchoring.
Fortunately, I don't hear you now well. I'm not sure if it's... No, now I hear you.
Okay, apologies. There is research, I think, showing that Americans will show high levels of anchoring when they are asked to make estimates about quantities to do with India, the length of rivers or the heights of buildings. And correspondingly, Indian people show high levels of anchoring when they're asked to make estimates about things in America, but that within their own country or their own sort of geographical region, the anchoring effects are much lower. So that would say that it's a domain specific thing rather than a general thing. Yeah.
I see. And here's another question related to experience. In marketing, we see these doubtful, I think, doubtful strategies or some companies that they always provide their products on sale. Like there are some jewelry stores here when it's always 50% off. And you know that it is at least 50% off. Like, so my question is, does it still impact? So this is obviously, I assume, an anchor because you feel that you buy an expensive product cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it might be. And I mean, so there's an interesting question about the percentage number and whether that has an anchoring influence. I wonder whether those effects might not also be thought of as framing effects, that you are kind of framing a price as being lower than some other number. And you could contrast that, I'm sure if you said to somebody, this necklace costs $10 and it's 50% reduced, people would find it more attractive than if you said this necklace costs $10 and it's 100% more than it was last week. Mm-hmm. That would be perhaps more like a framing effect. But yeah, I would be very surprised if there aren't some anchoring influences going on in these clever marketing strategies that people develop.
I see. Okay, thank you. So moving on from your research to more general questions, what is, in your opinion, the most pressing issue in social science nowadays?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess one pressing issue is for us to try to think about what the world is going to look like in 50 years in terms of the influence of large language models. I mean, I think, in the space of 12 months, the impact of these on our lives and on our thinking has been just extraordinary. And, we have all sorts of questions about what is education going to look like in the future? What is research going to look like in the future? I mean, I'm not sure I have any deep insights to offer, but I'm pretty sure that it would be really important for some clever people to think about some of the possibilities and maybe influence the direction in which we go, because some of the directions of travel could be more beneficial and some of them could be harmful.
Yes, and I think we are already seeing the impact, the huge impact of all these new technologies.
Yeah, I mean, to what extent is the currency of academia going to be viable in the future? I mean, if AI machines are generating research articles and we can't tell whether something has been made by humans or by machines, whether something is fake or real, I mean, life as an academic is going to become quite difficult.
At least in our fields. So as for now, I'm definitely not an expert, but in physics, it seems that they're less impactful. But maybe I'm completely wrong.
Maybe. But I think, I mean, the status of our journals is very complicated. How they're going to deal with AI generated material, some really deep problems for the field.
Yes, indeed, I completely agree with you.
And do you want to give a grant to somebody who has used AI to write their grant application? If I say to ChatGPT, write me the best and most compelling grant application you can, I could submit that. I mean, maybe it would get awarded, and then what?
You definitely can. And I'm almost sure that some people already submit grants or papers that are at least partly helped by ChatGPT. But another related question, can you even know, as a referee, probably know whatever something is written by ChatGPT?
yeah. So I really do think, I mean, and can you imagine a future in which, you know, papers really are generated by AI? I mean, maybe not in terms of generating primary data, but you could imagine an AI conducted meta-analysis where there's very little human involvement. The AI system ingests a whole bunch of paper, does a meta-analysis, finds all the papers, ingests them, runs an automated meta-analysis script over them, and produces, some meta-analytic results. What are we going to do with something like that?
I'm not sure that I have an opinion, but for example, we listen to music that was generated with the use of technology, which is not purely humanly created music, and some of us enjoy it. Or in other domains, like we eat processed food, we don't ask food.
There's something about, academic scholarly products that we think, I mean, this is an ideal rather than a reality, but we think that they have some standing because of the process by which they've been generated, that we have confidence in the steps of the process, that things have been done with integrity and with honesty and so on, and are credible. That's quite hard to, it's quite hard to make those judgments about an AI generated piece of research.
I completely agree with you. It just reminds me in a completely different domain. I don't remember the name of the guy, but someone who won a prize for the best photography a while ago. And then he said, no, I don't want the prize. I just wanted to raise the attention. I have not taken the photo. The photo was generated by some AI machine learning algorithm. So it's definitely a tough question.
Provenance is a really important concept. And even without AI, provenance has become extremely complicated for digital entities. And you have these NFTs, which sort of try to provide an electronic provenance for a digital artifact. But that has become an extremely controversial topic in its own right.
Yes, and again, related to your question, as a researcher, before we are fired, should we evaluate students' work, whatever they did it or they with the help?
Yeah, truly tricky.
Yes, time will show how we how the wisdom of the crowd or how we as a community solve open questions. And what is your vision for our community, let's say 10 years from now or for a certain time from now?
Yeah, well, if we can avoid all being made redundant by AI, I mean, I certainly hope that our practices will improve in their rigor and their integrity. We're getting better and better at adopting transparent processes, which I think, if anything, this will probably be accelerated by AI. Making our data available, making our analysis code available, just to give greater and greater confidence that what we've done is robust and reproducible. I think we're still on the early steps of a journey around rigor and transparency, and certainly hope that in 10 years' time that will be a different, things will look a bit different.
Yes, this is definitely pressing issues, and let's hope that the data will be more and more reproducible. So going from the future to the past, what is, in your opinion, the most impressive finding for the last, again, let's say 10 years or so?
Oh, I don't know. I would have to think about that. Sorry, I should have prepared this question.
Yes, I have tough questions.
I mean, does it have to be a finding, or can it be something a bit more general than that?
It can be definitely general. It can be whatever you want.
I mean, it's a bit more general. I think in the last 10 years, we've seen a complete transformation in the um, power of computational models to capture key aspects of our findings, our data. I think we now have models in areas like memory and learning and decision making, which are very rich, but which are also formalized in a mathematical computational way. So there's much less room to wriggle when looking at what the model predicts or doesn't predict, and fitting models to large data sets, which has been done in many, many aspects of judgment and decision making. I mean, you think about all the research on attraction effects and all of those effects where introducing additional objects into a decision set changes the fundamental nature of the decisions and preferences that people express. That research has been amazingly influenced by computational modeling approaches, and I think that has been a revolution in the field.
I see. And what is your advice for young scholars, or those who think of them as a young scholars?
Yeah. Well, I always, when I'm asked this question by my own students or by other students, I often say, look, it's very easy to think that this is a ridiculously competitive world, and that, if you haven't published a paper since breakfast today, you're kind of falling behind. And I try to convince students that actually this is an appalling misconception about scholarship. That one paper, which is absolutely a work of beauty and insight and rigor, it is worth, dozens of low-grade, unimaginative, routine papers. That's my view. And I speak as somebody who was for a long time head of my department, and I can remember decisions that we made to hire people when really we were hiring them largely on the basis of a single or a couple of pieces of work that they had done, which we just thought were absolutely extraordinary, and which made them stand out far above the other applicants for their jobs. So that's my piece of advice.
So you think that quality is way more important than quantity?
Completely, yeah.
Do you take the perspective? I think it's happening in fields like marketing, and especially in top universities, when people prefer, if the publication is not, when the paper is not published in an absolutely top journal, then they just keep it as a working paper and don't publish it in a tier B journal, for example. Or
no, I haven't come across that. I haven't come across that practice. Oh. I think I mean, so I guess that I would follow on from what I said, that when I talk about quality, that doesn't mean published in top journal X. It means quality. It means that sort of complex set of judgments that readers will make when they read the paper, whether it's in a top journal or whether it's a preprint, really doesn't matter. I mean, of course, if it's a fantastic piece of work, then it has every reason and every right to get accepted in a good journal. But they're not the same thing. And work can be of supremely high quality, even in a modest journal.
Yes, unfortunately, our as a reviewer, all the process is not perfect.
Well,
So
well,
not always correlated or
yeah,
not 100% correlated.
right. So many universities now have signed up to the principles of DORA, which is the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. And if your university has signed up to that, then it mandates you never to use impact factors in any context. Okay. So last week I was asked to assess a promotion application from somebody in another country. And the application materials included loads of references to impact factors. So in my letter, I said, quite explicitly, I work at a university which is a signatory to DORA. I deplore the use that you have in your system of relying on impact factors. And I have attempted to assess this person's credentials, making no reference or taking no heed of the impact factor of the publications that person has produced. So I think, we need to get the message out there whenever we have the opportunity to do that these inappropriate indicators of quality, we really must avoid using them.
So can you please elaborate a bit for our listeners why you think that the impact factor is an appropriate indicator?
Well, it's an indicator of the journal. It's not an indicator of an individual paper. The impact factor, if it's 10 or whatever it is, that tells you something about the journal. It doesn't tell you anything specific about the paper at all. What's much more important to know than the impact factor of a journal is what is the rigor of the editorial process. Okay. And that doesn't just mean how many papers do they reject. It means how rigorous is the process. And I think, almost everybody in the field who's had any experience with a range of journals will very quickly understand that some journals have outstandingly rigorous and good refereeing and reviewing processes. Almost every paper that they publish has been improved as a result of the referees and the editor. Other journals, we all know, have really, 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 really poor reviewing procedures where the reviewers are not expert and the editor makes no attempt to arbitrate between the authors and the referees. The editor just says, please fix these problems, So I think that's much, much more important than impact factor.
I think it is somewhat related to the incentives structure, because some doubtful journals which open access are just, or at least partially interested to get the fee for publication. And mostly that's it. Yeah. But yeah, I completely agree with you, not to mention other doubtful technique, like that some journals ask you to cite more of the papers.
Yeah, that's inexcusable. Yeah.
Yes. Which book would you recommend us to read?
This won't surprise you at all. I think that Kahneman's book, Noise, is an amazing piece of work. I think it's a beautiful illustration of how you can shed light on the everyday world around us with a little bit of deep thinking and come up with some, really sort of surprising views about the world, about what goes on in the legal world or in the medical world and so on, just by taking account of something as kind of familiar but unfamiliar as error and noise in the way that our minds operate. I think that is a beautiful book.
Okay, David, I want to thank you for this, for your time and for this excellent interview. It was my pleasure to talk with you. And for those of us who maybe missed your talk, so it is on our website, so you can listen to it as well. And again, thank you.
Thank you very much, Yefim.